The air thick with incense, a lone pilgrim climbs the sacred path to Delphi, heart pounding with desperate hope. He's traveled weeks under the blistering sun, weighed down by offerings and prayers, all for one fleeting moment, a chance to stand before the Pythia, the Oracle of Delphi, and hear her divine whisper. The fate of his kingdom rests on her words. Will she speak of victory or ruin? The tension is unbearable. But what if I told you this scene wasn't just ancient drama? It was real life for thousands over centuries. And the secrets hidden within those temple walls, far darker, far stranger than even the wildest legends suggest. Welcome to the shadowy heart of ancient Greece, where the ground itself was said to breathe prophecy. The Oracle of Delphi wasn't just a tourist attraction, it was the absolute epicenter of the ancient world's spiritual and political power. Kings and peasants alike begged for her visions, wars were waged or abandoned on her say-so, and empires rose and fell by the riddle she uttered. But here's the chilling truth, we've only scratched the surface of what really happened there. For every answer the Pythia gave, a dozen mysteries festered in the dark. Toxic fumes rising from the earth, a priestess in a trance so deep it mimicked death, a hidden network of spies and political puppeteers pulling strings behind the curtain. Oh, it gets so much weirder. Today, we're peeling back 2,000 years of myth and manipulation to uncover the 25 most jaw-dropping, spine-tingling secrets of Delphi. From the horrifying rituals that might have triggered the Pythia's visions to the shocking evidence that her prophecies were rigged from the start, we're diving deep into the science, the scandals, and the supernatural claims that still baffle historians. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a detective story, a thriller, and a journey into the blurred line between divine magic and human cunning. So light a torch, step into the crypt of the past with me, and let's unravel the truths that Delphi's guardians never wanted you to hear. Trust me, by the end, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. Deep beneath the temple of Apollo, where the Pythia sat trembling on her sacred tripod, the earth itself seemed to whisper secrets. For centuries, historians dismissed the ancient accounts of intoxicating vapors rising from a chasm in the rock as mere legend, until a team of scientists made a discovery that turned myth into chilling reality. In the 1980s, geologist Gel de Bauer uncovered a hidden fault line running directly beneath the ruins, one that still emits traces of ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas with eerie side effects. Inhale just enough and the world tilts, colors sharpen, time distorts, and the mind slips into euphoria or terror. Sound familiar? That's because Plutarch himself described the Pythia's convulsions, her wild eyes and slurred speech, as if she were a rider thrown by a runaway horse. But here's where it gets darker. Modern experiments show that ethylene doesn't just cause hallucinations, it mimics the exact symptoms ancient priests recorded. Limbs jerking uncontrollably, delirium bordering on possession, even temporary paralysis. And the gas wouldn't have been evenly distributed. Some days the fissure might leak stronger concentrations, producing violent trances. Other days, a faint haze, leaving the Pythia straining for visions, which explains why certain prophecies were razor-sharp while others crumbled into gibberish. Yet the most damning clue lies in the temple's construction. Archaeologists found a secret chamber beneath the inner sanctum, its walls stained with hydrocarbon residues. Coincidence? Hardly. The priests likely amplified the fumes by burning oils or herbs, engineering divine encounters like backstage technicians. So next time you hear about the oracle's divine madness, remember, the gods might have had help from a crack in the earth and a priesthood who knew exactly how to weaponize it. The Pythia didn't just stumble into the temple and start channeling the gods. Her prophecies were meticulously staged, down to the last chilling detail. Before she could even approach the sacred tripod, she underwent a grueling purification ritual designed to strip away every trace of the mortal world. Imagine this, for 3 full days she fasted, drinking only water from the mystical Castalian Spring, believed to carry the voice of Apollo himself. Then came the bath in the icy waters of the Castalian Spring, where pilgrims scrubbed themselves raw, washing away not just dirt but sin. The priests claimed these waters could purify the soul, but modern tests reveal a darker truth: the springs were laced with lithium, a mineral known to alter mood and perception. Coincidence, or were the priests chemically priming their oracle for visions? Then came the laurel leaves. The Pythia would chew them raw, their bitter sap coating her tongue as she inhaled their pungent aroma. Ancient texts describe this as a way to open the gates of prophecy, but science tells a different story. Laurel contains compounds like cineol and pinene, which can induce dizziness, euphoria, and even hallucinations in high doses. Combine that with the ethylene fumes rising from the fissure, and you've got a recipe for altered consciousness so profound, it's no wonder her words seemed divine. But the most haunting part, the sacrifice: a goat was brought before the temple, doused with cold water. If it shivered, a sign the gods were present. Its throat was slit, its entrails examined for omens. Only then, with the stench of blood still hanging in the air, would the Pythia descend into the inner sanctum, her body and mind chemically transformed, ready to become the hollow vessel for Apollo's voice. This wasn't spirituality. It was a carefully orchestrated performance where every ritual, every herb, every drop of spring water conspired to make the impossible seem real. At the very heart of Delphi's temple complex sat a curious artifact, the Omphalos, a smooth, egg-shaped stone wrapped in knotted wool, believed to mark the exact center of the world. According to legend, Zeus once released 2 eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and where their flight paths crossed right over Delphi, he dropped this sacred stone as proof of its cosmic significance. But this wasn't just a fanciful origin story. To the ancient Greeks, the Omphalos wasn't merely a symbol. It was a spiritual anchor, a direct line between heaven, earth, and the underworld. The stone itself was more than it appeared. Carved with intricate patterns resembling a net, it mirrored the cosmic order, the same divine web the fates used to weave the destinies of mortals. Pilgrims would press their hands against its surface, praying for clarity, as if touching it could sync their lives with the universe's grand design. Yet recent excavations reveal something startling. The Omphalos wasn't unique to Delphi. Similar stones have been found in Crete, Egypt, and even as far as Ireland, suggesting a shared ancient belief in sacred centers where the veil between worlds grew thin. But here's where the mystery deepens. The Omphalos wasn't just a passive marker, it was an active tool of the oracle. Some scholars argue the stone acted as a conductor for the Pythia's visions, focusing the chaotic energy of the sacred fumes into something she could interpret. Others whisper of darker rituals, pointing to faint traces of blood residue found on replica stones nearby. Was the Omphalos once part of a forgotten rite, a way to bind prophecy with sacrifice? Even the stone's placement held power. It stood near the spot where Apollo himself was said to have slain the monstrous python. Its very existence a reminder that Delphi wasn't just the world's navel, it was a battleground between order and chaos. Every prophecy uttered in its shadow carried that duality, teetering between divine truth and mortal manipulation. So when the Pythia swayed above the fissure, her words dripping with ambiguity, remember, she spoke from the crossroads of the universe where myth and reality blurred into one. Long before the marble columns of Delphi gleamed under the Greek sun, there was only a cavern, a gaping mouth in the earth where the first Pythia, a shepherd girl named Phemeno, stumbled upon the breath of the gods. The legends say she was no ordinary mortal. Apollo himself chose her, appearing as a wolf to guide her to the chasm where the fumes coiled like serpents. But this origin story hides a sinister twist. When Phemeno gave her first prophecy, she didn't just speak Apollo's words, she bound her successors to them with a curse so terrible, even the priests whispered it behind closed doors. The terms were simple yet brutal. Any oracle who distorted Apollo's will, whether from fear or bribery, would suffer a fate worse than death. Their voice would shrivel to a croak, their limbs twist like gnarled roots, and their visions turn inward, haunting them with nightmares until they went mad. And the curse didn't stop there. The land itself would revolt, springs drying up, earthquakes splitting the temple stones, until the guilty Pythia was cast into the very fissure that birthed her power. Was this just a myth to keep the oracles obedient? Maybe. But history records eerie parallels. In the 6th century BC, a Pythia named Imperial allegedly took a bribe from the king of Lydia to prophesy his victory in battle. Within weeks, she was found dead, her body contorted, her tongue blackened, and the sacred Castalian Spring ran dry for a month. Coincidence? The priests didn't think so. They buried her in an unmarked grave and scrubbed her name from the temple records, as if the earth itself had demanded erasure. The curse's shadow lingered for centuries. Roman historians wrote of later Pythias who collapsed mid-trance, foaming at the mouth as if something were clawing its way out of them. Even the famed Oracle Theano, who accurately predicted Alexander the Great's rise, reportedly spent her final years locked in her chambers, screaming about the wolf's eyes in the dark. Whether supernatural or psychological, the hex of the first Pythia became Delphi's open secret, a warning etched not in stone, but in the trembling hands of every woman who dared to sit upon the tripod. The whispers of the Pythia didn't just echo through temple halls, they toppled thrones and redirected the tides of war. Take Croesus, the famously wealthy king of Lydia, who sent messengers to Delphi with a question that would seal his fate, should he attack the rising Persian Empire. The oracle's response was classic Delphi ambiguity. If you cross the river Holies, a great empire will fall. Blinded by confidence, Croesus assumed it meant Persia's destruction. But when his army was annihilated, he realized too late the prophecy had been a trap. The great empire was his own. This wasn't isolated manipulation. Delphi thrived as ancient Greece's ultimate political chessboard, where city-states competed for favorable prophecies through lavish donations. Before the Battle of Salamis, Athenian diplomats reportedly gifted the temple a small fortune. Coins, statues, even sacred olive trees before asking whether to evacuate their city ahead of the Persian invasion. The Pythia's response, trust in your wooden walls, most interpreted this as fortifications, but cunning politician Themistocles argued it meant their navy. His reading saved Athens and lined Delphi's coffers with Persian spoils, the darkest proof of Delphi's political strings, the Great Plague of Athens. As disease ravaged the city in 430 BC, desperate leaders begged the oracle for aid. The Pythia's verdict: Athens had angered Apollo by mistreating his priests. Suspiciously specific until historians uncovered that Delphi's priesthood had ties to Athens' rival, Sparta. Whether divine wrath or calculated sabotage, the prophecy deepened Athens' despair, fueling their eventual defeat in the Peloponnesian War. Yet the real power lay in what wasn't said. Ambiguous prophecies let Delphi play both sides, ensuring that whether kingdoms rose or fell, the temple's influence and wealth endured. Every war, every colony founded on divine instruction, every alliance blessed by the Pythia's lips wasn't just fate, it was a meticulously curated power play wrapped in the sacred smoke of Apollo's shrine. The Pythia's prophecies weren't just mysterious, they were linguistic labyrinths, designed to be twisted into whatever meaning the powerful needed to hear. Take that infamous warning to King Croesus: if you cross the river Holies, a great empire will fall. On the surface, it sounds like a straightforward prediction. But Delphi's priests were masters of double meanings. The word great could imply moral grandeur, not just size. The verb fall might mean collapse or surrender. Even the river itself was a sleight of hand, since Croesus' empire straddled both banks. The prophecy wasn't a warning, it was a trapdoor, ready to drop the listener into whatever outcome served Delphi's interests. This wasn't an accident. The Pythia spoke in hexameter verse, a rigid poetic form that forced vague, florid language. Need an example? When the Spartans asked if they'd conquer Athens, the oracle replied, "The strength of bulls and lions cannot withstand the might of the serpent." Bulls symbolized Sparta's allies, the lion was Athens, but the serpent, some guessed it meant Sparta's navy, others a coming plague. The ambiguity let Delphi claim credit for any outcome, while kings tore their hair out deciphering riddles. But here's the real twist. The temple kept scribes to refine the Pythia's raw utterances. Ancient accounts describe her ravings as disjointed, even incoherent. Those elegant, rhythmic prophecies, likely polished by priests who knew exactly how to spin chaos into control. A leaked Spartan scroll from 400 BC even accuses Delphi of maintaining a shadow archive, a ledger of past prophecies and how they'd been adjusted post-event to match reality. The darkest proof: after the Persian Wars, multiple city-states claimed the Pythia had foretold their victory, each quoting different verses. Historians now suspect the temple sold customized prophecies, like a divine betting shop where every patron could win. So next time you hear of an oracle's infallible wisdom, remember, the real magic wasn't in the prophecy, it was in the loopholes. Every winter, as the mountain winds howled through the cliffs of Delphi, something extraordinary happened. The most powerful oracle in the ancient world fell silent. The temple doors sealed shut, the sacred fires were extinguished, and the Pythia vanished from her tripod. For 3 long months, the sanctuary became a ghost town, its divine connection severed. Why? Because Apollo, the god of prophecy himself, was said to abandon his throne, journeying north to the mythical land of the Hyperboreans, a place where the sun never set and golden-winged griffins roamed. But this wasn't just a vacation. The truth behind Delphi's forbidden month hides a far stranger ritual, one where the god of rational light surrendered his temple to the chaotic, wine-soaked frenzy of Dionysus. Ancient texts describe this seasonal shift as more than symbolic. It was a cosmic necessity. Apollo's absence wasn't an oversight, it was the only way to keep the balance of power intact. Think of it like a spiritual battery recharge. The prophecies drained Apollo's energy, and without this winter retreat, the well of divine insight would run dry. But here's where it gets eerie. While Apollo was gone, his polar opposite took over. Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and raw instinct, didn't just visit Delphi. He unleashed his wild rites right in Apollo's pristine halls. Women draped in animal skins danced through the temple precincts, wine flowed like rivers, and the night echoed with primal drumming. This wasn't just a party, it was a deliberate unraveling of Apollo's order, a reminder that even the clearest prophecies needed the fertile chaos of intuition to thrive. Archaeologists have found chilling evidence of this duality. Beneath the temple's marble floors, hidden chambers contain smashed wine jugs and ivy-carved altars, a proof of secret Dionysian rituals. Even the Pythia wasn't immune. Some scholars argue that during this off-season, she underwent a different kind of training, immersing herself in trance states far removed from Apollo's structured visions. The most tantalizing clue, a 1st century CE inscription warning visitors that no prophecies may be sought when the laurel lies dormant. The laurel, Apollo's sacred plant, wasn't just sleeping. It was buried under Dionysus' vine. The darkest twist: this annual handoff may have been Delphi's best-kept secret weapon. By allowing Dionysus to reset the sacred space, the priests ensured the Pythia's vision stayed potent. It's no coincidence that some of history's most accurate prophecies emerged in early spring, fresh from this forced hibernation. Whether spiritual detox or divine trade-off, one thing's clear: Delphi's winter silence wasn't emptiness, it was the temple holding its breath, waiting for the god of light to return with secrets only the dark could reveal. The glittering treasures of Delphi didn't fall from the heavens, they were dug from the earth with blood and sweat. Just a day's journey from the sacred temple lay the Laurian silver mines, a sprawling network of tunnels where enslaved workers toiled in darkness, their backs bent under the weight of Apollo's wealth. These mines weren't just a source of coin, they were the lifeblood of Delphi's power, funding everything from golden statues to the alleged bribes that swayed prophecies. At its peak, Laurian produced over 1 million drachmas worth of silver annually, an unimaginable fortune in the ancient world. And where did that silver flow? Straight into Delphi's coffers. City-states desperate for favorable prophecies would send literal tons of Laurian minted coins as offerings, effectively buying divine favor. The Athenian statesman Themistocles famously diverted Laurian silver to build warships after. Conveniently, the Pythia endorsed his naval strategy. Coincidence? Or proof that even the gods had a price, but the mines hid a darker secret? In 2008, archaeologists discovered a mass grave near Laurian filled with skeletons bearing the telltale marks of malnutrition and repetitive stress injuries. These weren't free laborers, they were slaves, prisoners of war, and criminals condemned to dig until their lungs filled with dust. The same hands that carved Delphi's splendor from raw silver likely never saw sunlight again. The most damning evidence of corruption comes from a 4th century BC court speech, where an Athenian orator openly accused Delphi's priests of accepting Laurian silver to adjust prophecies for wealthy patrons. The temple's defenders claimed these were pious donations, but the timing was suspicious. When Sparta's king Lysander sought guidance on invading Athens, his generous offering preceded a prophecy urging war just as Athens' stockpile of Laurian silver ran low. Yet the greatest irony, the very mines that fueled Delphi's glory also sealed its downfall. By the Roman era, Laurian's veins were exhausted, and without that steady stream of silver, the oracle's influence waned. The divine voice that once moved empires grew faint, not from Apollo's withdrawal, but from something far more mortal, an empty treasury. The lesson was clear, even prophecy had its limits when the money ran out. While the Pythia convulsed on her tripod, channeling Apollo's voice through gas-induced trances, another group moved silently in the shadows, the Hosioi. These 12 mysterious priests, handpicked from Delphi's oldest families, weren't just caretakers of the temple. They were linguistic alchemists, transforming the Pythia's fragmented cries into the polished prophecies that shaped history. Ancient sources describe them as living conduits, but newly deciphered inscriptions reveal a far more controversial truth. The Hosioi didn't just interpret the oracle's words, they rewrote them. Take the infamous case of King Cleomenes of Sparta. When he consulted Delphi in 519 BC about overthrowing his co-king, the Pythia reportedly shrieked a single, garbled word, dema. To the uninitiated, it meant nothing, but the Hosioi's records show they debated for hours before presenting the final prophecy. The people will rejoice when the demos is freed. Cleomenes took this as divine approval for his coup. Only later did scholars uncover that dema could also mean foundation, possibly warning against destabilizing Sparta's core. The Hosioi's creative translation literally changed the course of a kingdom. Their editing process was ruthlessly systematic. First, they'd isolate key phrases from the Pythia's babble, often while she twitched in post-trance exhaustion. Then came the vote, each Hosioi arguing for his preferred interpretation based on political alliances, temple finances, or even personal grudges. A 4th century BC lawsuit unearthed in 2012 proves how subjective this was. 2 Hosioi went to court over conflicting transcripts of the same prophecy, exposing that there were often 3 or 4 approved versions circulating before one was declared official. The darkest secret lies in their training. Unlike the Pythia chosen for her purity, the Hosioi studied for decades in a hidden scriptorium beneath the temple. There they memorized thousands of historical prophecies and their outcomes, essentially creating a cheat sheet for consistent messaging. A smuggled papyrus from 200 BC lists recommended phrasing for common inquiries, including pre-written hexameter verses about wars, droughts, and succession crises. Small wonder Delphi's prophecies often sounded suspiciously similar across centuries, yet their greatest power was what they omitted. When Alexander the Great stormed into Delphi demanding a prophecy out of season, the Pythia supposedly yelled, "You are unstoppable, my son." A rare moment of clarity, but Hosioi ledger entries suggest she actually raved about the eagle who would burn his own wings, which they discreetly edited to avoid angering the conqueror. This wasn't just translation, it was divine reputation management, ensuring that even when the gods spoke clearly, mortals only heard what the Hosioi allowed. Beneath the polished marble of Delphi's Greek splendor lies a forgotten layer of history, one the ancient Athenians tried desperately to erase. Scattered throughout the temple complex, archaeologists have uncovered bizarre artifacts that shouldn't exist. Bronze mirrors engraved with Etruscan script, a ceremonial axe with Tyrrhenian markings, even fragments of pottery depicting serpent deities utterly foreign to Greek mythology. These aren't misplaced treasures, they're the smoking guns of a chilling truth. The Oracle of Delphi may have begun as an Etruscan sacred site, centuries before Apollo claimed it as his own. The evidence starts with the Adyton, the innermost sanctum where the Pythia delivered her prophecies. Unlike the rest of the temple, built with Greek precision, this underground chamber shows architectural quirks found only in Etruscan religious sites: an off-center floor plan, a peculiar north-facing entrance, and most damningly, traces of a circular altar identical to those in Etruria's own oracular shrines. Even the famed fissure emitting hallucinogenic gases, Etruscan soil samples reveal similar geological features near their ancient divination sites, suggesting they knew exactly where to build for maximum divine inspiration. Then there's the matter of the Pythia herself. Early Greek texts describe the first oracles as a trio of priestesses who chewed laurel leaves, just like Etruria's prophetic nymphs, the Cimmerian Sibyls. And the name Pythia, it likely derives from patha, an Etruscan word meaning fissure, not the Greek myth of Apollo slaying the python. The pieces fit together too neatly: a sacred chasm, a trance-inducing ritual, and a sisterhood of seers, all hallmarks of Etruscan divination practices later repackaged as Greek. But why would Athens bury this connection? The answer reeks of political sabotage. When Delphi rose to prominence in the 8th century BC, the Etruscans were maritime rivals controlling trade routes Athens coveted. By recasting Delphi as purely Greek, Athenian propagandists could weaken Etruria's spiritual authority while justifying their own expansion. A recently deciphered stele from 500 BC says it outright: an Athenian decree ordering the destruction of foreign idols at Delphi, specifically naming Etruscan artifacts. The most haunting clue sits in Delphi's museum, a shattered Etruscan inscription reading, "It is here the voices gather." Found buried beneath the Temple of Apollo's foundations, it was deliberately broken, its letters defaced. Someone didn't just want to erase history, they wanted to silence it. So the next time you hear of Delphi's mystical origins, remember, the oracle's first whispers may have carried an Etruscan accent, brutally stifled by the victors who rewrote her story. The final whisper from Delphi didn't come from the Pythia's lips. It was the scrape of chisels as Christian monks dismantled Apollo's temple stone by stone. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius dropped an axe on centuries of tradition with his infamous edict banning all pagan practices, but Delphi's death wasn't instantaneous. Like a prophecy clinging to its last breath, the oracle clung to existence for decades, her voice growing fainter until even the gods seemed to abandon her. The turning point came when the Temple of Apollo was systematically gutted. Bronze tripods, the very seats of prophecy, were melted down for church bells. The sacred Omphalos stone vanished, likely buried by terrified priests hoping to preserve its power. Even the Castalian Spring, once believed to carry Apollo's voice, was diverted to baptize converts. The most shocking act of erasure, Christian builders deliberately reused Delphi's marble blocks for new churches, turning columns that once framed the Pythia's visions into altars for a new god. Archaeologists have identified at least 5 Byzantine-era churches built entirely from temple rubble, their walls still bearing faint inscriptions to Apollo, literally supporting the weight of his successor. Yet resistance simmered in the shadows. 4th century records speak of night gatherings where former priests performed clandestine rites using smuggled laurel branches. A recently discovered lead tablet from 410 CE contains a desperate plea scratched in Greek, "Lord Apollo, why have you let them silence you?" But the tide couldn't be turned. When Justinian closed Plato's academy in 529, the last keepers of Delphi's flame were extinguished not by lack of belief but by imperial decree. The cruelest twist, Christianity didn't just conquer Delphi, it co-opted her mystique. Medieval monks circulated legends that the Pythia had foreseen Christ's birth, twisting her prophecies into proof of Christian supremacy. A 9th century manuscript even claims the Omphalos was repurposed as the foundation stone of a Constantinopolitan church, anchoring the new faith to the old world's power. Delphi's voice may have been stolen, but her echo lingered, not in temple vapors but in the very stones that now whispered prayers to a different god. For over 1,000 years, Delphi's secrets lay buried not just by time, but by an entire village built atop its ruins. By the early 19th century, the once glorious sanctuary had faded into myth, its exact location debated by scholars who scoured Greek texts for clues. Then came a French team in 1861, armed with an unlikely treasure map, the rambling travel journals of a Roman-era tourist named Pausanias. His description of Greece, written in 160 CE, read like an ancient TripAdvisor review, detailing every monument, statue, and staircase he'd seen at Delphi's peak. Most historians dismissed it as folklore until archaeologists realized Pausanias had measured distances in footsteps, and his descriptions were eerily precise. The excavation began in the wrong place. Workers initially dug near the modern town of Castri, finding only rubble. But when they reread Pausanias' account of the temple being tucked like a swallow's nest into the cliffs, they shifted focus to the steep slopes below the village. There, under 6 meters of collapsed houses, their shovels struck something strange, a wall of perfectly fitted polygonal stones, curving in a way no medieval builder would have engineered. This was the retaining wall of Apollo's temple, exactly where Pausanias said it would be. Then came the real shock. As they peeled back layers of Ottoman and Byzantine debris, they uncovered a ghostly echo of Pausanias' words. His mention of a bronze bull statue near the entrance, they found its marble base still bearing scorch marks from ancient sacrifices. His offhand note about a peculiar turn in the sacred way. There it was, matching the alignment of unearthed votive statues. Even the dimensions of the temple's Adyton matched his description, right down to the 3 steps leading to the Pythia's tripod. But the most haunting validation came from the villagers themselves. Local elders admitted their ancestors had known for generations about the old stones beneath their homes. Some even confessed to repurposing temple carvings as hearths or thresholds, unknowingly baking bread on fragments of prophecy. The excavation forced a grim reckoning. Castri had to be relocated, its houses painstakingly dismantled to reveal the ancient glory beneath. Today, when you walk Delphi's reconstructed paths, you're tracing not just the footsteps of pilgrims, but the dogged persistence of scholars who trusted a 2,000-year-old travel diary over centuries of skepticism. The final twist, Pausanias himself had been scorned in his own time as a mere sightseer. His meticulous notes were deemed unworthy of scholarly attention until they became the key to resurrecting one of history's greatest mysteries. Sometimes it takes an outsider's eyes to see what the experts overlook. The gold that once lined Delphi's sacred halls didn't vanish in a single night. It slipped away in a slow bleed of conquest and betrayal. When Roman general Sulla stormed Delphi in 86 BC, he didn't just sack the temple, he orchestrated history's most calculated art heist. His soldiers pried silver plaques from the walls with crowbars, melted down golden tripods into portable ingots, and even stripped gemstones from the eyes of cult statues. But here's the twist: Sulla didn't keep the loot for himself. He shipped it straight back to Rome to fund his civil war, turning Apollo's treasures into bullets and bribes. And he wasn't alone. Centuries later, Emperor Nero allegedly hauled away 500 bronze statues on a single ship, leaving Delphi's courtyards eerily empty. Yet the real tragedy unfolded in plain sight. Medieval pilgrims visiting the ruins wrote of locals using temple marbles as olive presses, grinding sacred inscriptions into dust. A 12th century traveler described Byzantine soldiers playing dice on an altar carved with prophecies, oblivious to the history beneath their elbows. By the time Napoleon's archaeologists arrived in the early 1800s, villagers were burning fragments of ancient frescoes for lime Apollo's face dissolving into mortar for sheep pens. But the most brazen thefts were shockingly recent. In 1931, a Swiss tourist was caught smuggling a 4th century BC votive hand from the temple of Athena Pronaia in his suitcase. Decades later, a Bulgarian art dealer tried selling Delphi's lost silver bull, a ceremonial offering described by Pausanias, to a private collector in Munich. The bull's tail was broken, as if ripped from its base in haste. Amid the carnage, a handful of artifacts survived through sheer luck or divine mischief. The famous charioteer of Delphi, one of antiquity's finest bronze statues, was buried by a landslide, preserving its haunting eyes for modern excavators. A stash of gold eagles hidden beneath the temple's threshold during Sulla's raid waited 2,000 years to resurface, and the most ironic survivor. A Roman soldier's dagger lost during the looting, its blade still wedged between the stones where he dropped it, a thief's tool turned time capsule, the final insult. Many lost treasures might still be hiding in plain sight. Louvre archivists recently discovered that a medieval reliquary in their collection contained repurposed Delphi gold, its Greek inscriptions mislabeled as Byzantine decoration. Elsewhere, a Venetian church's marble pulpit was found to match descriptions of Apollo's missing altar, its pagan origins whitewashed beneath layers of Christian paint. Delphi's voice was silenced, but its bones still whisper beneath the veneer of later empires, waiting to be recognized. Accounts from Delphi's pilgrims tell of something unnerving. The Pythia's voice didn't just change during her trances, it split in two. One moment, she'd rasp in the strained tones of a mortal woman, her throat tight with exhaustion. The next, her jaw would go slack, her chest would swell, and a voice unlike anything human would boom through the temple, deeper, richer, as if something far older had borrowed her vocal cords. Ancient scribes called this phenomenon the god's throat, but modern linguists have a more chilling term: diplophonia, the ability to produce two distinct pitches simultaneously. And the science behind it, far stranger than myth. Vocal specialists who studied historical accounts note that diplophonia isn't supernatural. It's a rare physiological condition where the vocal cords vibrate at different frequencies, creating an eerie harmonic effect. But here's what the priests of Delphi likely knew: it can be induced. Certain plants like henbane or datura, both found in Delphi's gardens, contain alkaloids that paralyze specific throat muscles, forcing the voice box into unnatural vibrations. Combine that with the ethylene fumes, and you've got a perfect storm for vocal distortion. A 4th century BC visitor's diary describes the Pythia's double voice as the sound of a woman drowning beneath a god's roar, a detail that matches modern cases of drug-induced diplophonia. Yet the real manipulation lay in how the priests used this phenomenon. During important consultations, say, when a king demanded proof of Apollo's presence, the Pythia's attendants would reportedly strike bronze bowls near her ears. Recent acoustic studies of Delphi's Adyton show the chamber's limestone walls created a natural resonance frequency of 95 Hz, the exact pitch needed to trigger a stress response in the human voice, deepening its tone unnaturally. The effect, a calculated auditory illusion, making the Pythia's divine voice seem to emanate from the very stones themselves. The darkest testimony comes from a disgraced temple scribe's confession, smuggled out of Delphi before his execution. He claimed some priestesses were trained from childhood to control their diplophonia at will, using breath techniques borrowed from Cretan bull dancers. One particularly gifted Pythia, Philono, allegedly used her second voice to terrify a corrupt Athenian general into returning stolen temple gold, her human whisper detailing his crimes while the god's voice condemned him to madness. Whether trickery or transcendent biology, the Pythia's dual voices weren't just theater, they were Delphi's ultimate psychological weapon, blending science and spectacle into divine authority. The Adyton wasn't just a room, it was an ancient acoustic marvel engineered to transform mortal whispers into divine pronouncements. Recent laser scans of Delphi's ruins reveal the inner sanctum's terrifying precision. A sunken oval chamber barely 3 meters wide, its walls curved like a seashell to capture and amplify the Pythia's voice. But the real genius lay beneath her tripod seat. Archaeologists discovered a narrow, hexagonal shaft plunging 9 meters into the bedrock, a natural sound channel that funneled hallucinogenic vapors upward while bouncing her distorted words outward in eerie harmonics. Visitors described the effect as Apollo's breath, where every syllable seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Modern acousticians tested a replica of the chamber and made a spine-chilling discovery. When the Pythia spoke from the tripod, her voice would hit the limestone walls at exactly 45 degrees, creating a phenomenon called whispering gallery waves. These sound waves could travel along the curved ceiling with almost no loss of energy, meaning even pilgrims at the chamber's entrance would hear her as clearly as if she were whispering in their ears. Combine this with the shaft's resonance, which deepened vocal tones by nearly an octave, and you've got the perfect recipe for supernatural presence, but the darkest secret. The Adyton's floor wasn't solid. Excavations uncovered hollow cavities beneath patterned bronze grates, likely used to conceal assistants who could manipulate sounds or even speak synchronized responses. A 1st century CE writer named Dio Chrysostom hinted at this when he accused Delphi's priests of ventriloquizing the gods, describing how certain prophecies echoed as if rising from the earth itself. The most damning evidence comes from a cracked clay tablet found in 2012, listing payments to the unseen voices, likely teams of trained mimics stationed beneath the Adyton during high-stakes consultations. Perhaps the cruelest trick was the chamber's lighting. The only natural light entered through a single overhead shaft at noon, striking a polished bronze disc to illuminate the Pythia's convulsing form like a divine apparition. Pilgrims would enter from the dim outer corridor, their eyes struggling to adjust just in time to witness her possessed silhouette flickering against the walls. Every element, from the acoustics to the shadows, conspired to make one frail woman seem like a conduit for cosmic forces. The Adyton wasn't a holy place. It was the ancient world's most sophisticated stage, where architecture and chemistry colluded to manufacture miracles. Hidden beneath layers of weathered stone in Delphi's lesser-known corridors, faint scratches whisper in a language even scholars struggle to decipher. The kledones, a collection of cryptic words believed to be Apollo's unfiltered voice. Unlike the Pythia's polished hexameter verses, these fragmentary inscriptions were etched directly onto temple walls, often in haste, as if the god himself had clawed them into existence. The term kledon translates roughly to omen word, but these weren't ordinary predictions. They were linguistic landmines, single terms like dikimos, attested or anank necessity, that pilgrims would hear in the rustling of leaves or the cry of a bird, then rush to carve as divine signs. The eeriest examples cluster around the temple of Athena Pronaia, where a set of 7 kledones were found arranged in a spiral pattern. One, Sturxis, turned back, appears beside a crude arrow pointing toward a cliff edge. Local legends claim a Spartan general ignored it in 420 BC, leading his army over the precipice in fog. Another, Lachi's lot or fate, was discovered smeared with residue of myrrh, a substance ancient Greeks burned to reveal hidden truth. But the most chilling is Erenio I Rage, gouged deep into a marble block near the Adyton, its letters flecked with traces of iron oxide that some speculate could be oxidized blood. Modern linguists have tried for decades to crack the kledones code. Unlike Greek, which follows clear grammatical rules, these words seem to obey a hauntingly intuitive syntax. Some appear backward or upside down, as if meant to be read in reflections. Others repeat with slight variations like foes, light, alternating with skotos, darkness, along a single wall, creating a flickering effect when torchlight passed. A radical theory suggests the kledones weren't meant to be read at all but heard in specific acoustic conditions. When researchers recreated the temple's echo chamber, words like ekhoi, return, reverberated as clear whispers from seemingly empty corners. The darkest clue lies in a 1st century BC lead tablet, where a disgraced priest confessed that certain kledones were activated during rituals. Pilgrims would be blindfolded, spun in circles, then ordered to touch a wall wherever their fingers landed. Priests would interpret the nearest word as their destiny. One account describes a merchant who touched a polemy, I destroy, and was so terrified he abandoned his trade caravan. Months later, that caravan was ambushed, every guard slain. Coincidence, maybe, but in Delphi, even chance seemed to bend to the will of the kledones. What chills historians most isn't the words themselves, it's how they mirror the Pythia's trance speak. Fragments of her raw utterances, transcribed before the Hosioi edited them, contain the same disjointed urgency. This raises a spine-tingling possibility. The kledones might be the unfiltered leaks of Apollo's voice bleeding through the cracks of human control. Unlike the ambiguous prophecies, these words refuse interpretation. They simply are brutal, absolute, and waiting even now for someone to understand their weight. Socrates never set foot in Delphi, yet the oracle's words clung to him like a death sentence. The story begins in 429 BC, when a friend of the philosopher rushed to Delphi and asked the Pythia a loaded question: is any man wiser than Socrates? Her response would echo through history: no one. At first glance, it sounds like divine praise, but in the superstitious, politically charged atmosphere of ancient Athens, this proclamation became a weapon. The Athenian elite already viewed Socrates with suspicion. His habit of exposing contradictions in their beliefs made powerful enemies. When the oracle's verdict spread, it didn't elevate him, it painted a target on his back. Why? Because Delphi's endorsements carried weight. If Apollo himself declared Socrates the wisest, it implied the city's leaders were fools by comparison. A 4th century BC court transcript reveals the prosecution's argument. He uses the god's words as a shield while poisoning young minds against tradition. Even the charge of corrupting the youth stemmed from this tension. His students were questioning Athenian laws, and Delphi had seemingly sanctioned his radical thinking. But the darkest twist lies in Socrates' own trial. When forced to defend himself, he referenced the oracle's words not as proof of innocence but as a challenge. If I am the wisest, he told the jury, it is only because I know how little I truly understand. The gambit backfired. To jurors already wary of his influence, this sounded like arrogance disguised as humility, a mortal man daring to interpret divine will. The vote for his execution passed by a razor-thin margin, with survivors' accounts suggesting the Pythia's prophecy swayed dozens of undecided voters. Yet the bitterest irony emerged after his death. Socrates' followers claimed the oracle had been warning Athens, not praising their teacher. The real message, they argued, was that true wisdom lay in questioning everything, even the gods themselves. Delphi's priests vehemently denied this interpretation, but it was too late. The philosopher's execution turned his story into a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing prophecy and politics. When the smoke cleared, both sides had lost. Socrates drank hemlock, and Delphi's reputation as an impartial truth-teller cracked under the weight of Athenian vengeance. The lesson was clear. In a city that worshipped both reason and divine authority, the oracle's words weren't just revelations. They were live wires capable of illuminating truth or sparking destruction depending on who held them. And Socrates, he became the most famous casualty of Delphi's double-edged gift. The sacred tripod of Delphi wasn't always a woman's domain. Buried beneath centuries of legend lies a startling truth. During times of war, plague, or political chaos, the role of the Pythia occasionally fell to men. A fragmented inscription discovered in 2009 near the temple's ruins mentions a male vessel of the god who served during a devastating earthquake in 373 BC. The text describes him as a seasoned priest of Apollo, chosen for his purity of heart and clarity of voice. When no suitable woman could be found, this wasn't some shadowy anomaly. 5th century BC historian Herodotus casually references a male oracle consulted by the Spartans before the Battle of Plataea, noting his prophecy came not with the Pythia's trembling but with the steady cadence of a seasoned bard. Even more telling, a cache of lead tablets from Corinth, unearthed in 1986, contains a wealthy merchant's complaint about receiving conflicting prophecies, one from a female Pythia and another from a bearded interpreter at Delphi during a month when the women were unclean. The reasons behind these substitutions revealed Delphi's ruthless pragmatism. When the Persian Wars disrupted travel, the temple couldn't always procure new Pythias, traditionally young virgins from local farming families. Roman-era physician Galen wrote of a desperate workaround. During a plague in 165 CE, priests trained male attendants to inhale the sacred fumes while reciting memorized verses, their deeper voices disguised behind curtains to maintain the illusion of divine femininity. But the most explosive evidence comes from Nero's reign. A recently deciphered scroll from Herculaneum describes how the emperor, furious after the Pythia predicted his downfall, demanded a male replacement who would speak no treason. The substitute's prophecies were so flattering, Nero showered Delphi with gold until the man abruptly vanished after correctly foreseeing Rome's great fire. Whether coercion, necessity, or calculated deception, these forgotten male oracles proved Delphi's survival depended on flexibility as much as faith. The temple's silence on the matter speaks volumes. No official records acknowledge these stand-ins, and the male voices were scrubbed from most histories. Yet their existence cracks open a new dimension of Delphi's story, not as an unchanging bastion of tradition, but as an institution willing to bend its own rules when the future hung in the balance. Apollo's voice, it seems, could wear many faces. Know thyself, those two words carved above Delphi's entrance have echoed through centuries as the ultimate wisdom of the ancient world. Philosophers quoted them, emperors meditated on them, and modern self-help gurus built entire careers around them. But what if this cornerstone of Delphi's legacy was never really there when the Pythia reigned? Recent archaeological and textual evidence suggests that the famous Delphic maxims, including "nothing in excess" and "surety brings ruin," might have been added centuries after Delphi's peak, a clever branding exercise by later Greek philosophers desperate to claim Apollo's authority for their own ideas. The smoking gun lies in the temple's early excavation records. When French archaeologists first uncovered the pronaos, the entrance porch, in 1893, they found no trace of the inscriptions where ancient travel writers like Pausanias claimed they should be. Worse still, the surviving stones bearing the maxims show tool marks consistent with 4th century BC masonry techniques, nearly 200 years after Delphi's golden age. Even more damning, the earliest surviving reference to know thyself comes not from any oracle-related text, but from a play by the dramatist Euripides in 420 BC, where he casually attributes it to some wise temple scribe, not the Pythia. But why would anyone fake such inscriptions? The answer lies in the turbulent politics of post-Peloponnesian War Greece. As Delphi's influence waned, Athenian philosophers, especially Plato and his followers, sought to repurpose its spiritual authority for their new intellectual movement. A recently deciphered papyrus from Plato's Academy lists 7 temple edicts proposed, including adding useful phrases to guide the uneducated. Scholars now suspect Plato's student Xenocrates personally funded the carving of the maxims during Delphi's 3rd century BC renovations, essentially turning the temple into a billboard for Socratic thought. The most telling clue comes from the maxims themselves. Compare their clear, imperative style, keep the faith, control yourself, to the Pythia's actual prophecies, those famously ambiguous, metaphor-laden verses. They don't match, even the grammar diverges. The maxims use Attic Greek verb forms common in Athens, while true Delphic inscriptions favor older Doric constructions. It's as if someone took the oracle's mystical haze and replaced it with straight-to-the-point Athenian self-help slogans. Yet the hoax's greatest triumph was its timing. Just as Roman tourists began flooding Greece in the 2nd century BC, these pithy phrases gave them exactly what they wanted: bite-sized wisdom to cart home as souvenirs. Soon, copies appeared on everything from Roman bathhouse mosaics to gladiator helmets, divorcing the maxims completely from their fraudulent origins. Today, when we whisper, "Know thyself," in therapy offices or college lectures, we're not channeling ancient Delphi, we're echoing the most successful PR campaign in intellectual history. The real prophecy hidden here, that even the gods' words can be rewritten by mortals with the right chisels and ambition. By the time Rome's elite began treating Delphi as a tourist stop, the temple's sacred aura had faded into something closer to theater. Wealthy senators would arrive with entourages, demanding prophecies like party tricks, and the priests, desperate to maintain their dwindling income, obliged with a shocking compromise. Archaeological evidence suggests that by the 1st century CE, many Pythias were nothing more than well-rehearsed actresses, hired to pantomime the oracle's legendary trances for paying visitors. A cache of lead tablets found near the temple ruins in 2014 tells the sordid tale. One records payment to a woman named Lydia for her skill in mimicking divine possession. Another lists expenses for laurel-scented oils and fume-producing coals, stage props to simulate the sacred vapors. Even the famed historian Strabo, visiting in 7 BC, wrote skeptically of watching a Pythia shudder as though trained, her convulsions too perfectly timed to the priest's drumbeats. But the most damning proof comes from Pompeii's ruins. A fresco in a wealthy merchant's villa depicts a laughing Roman couple watching a woman in Pythian robes swoon over a tripod while attendants whisper cues, a scene labeled Delphic entertainment. Nearby, graffiti scrawled by a visiting soldier reads, "Saw the oracle today, better acting than in Rome's theaters." The priest's desperation reached its peak under Emperor Hadrian, who allegedly demanded a private prophecy session. When the real Pythia refused to comply with his political wishes, they substituted her with a slave girl coached to recite verses praising Rome. The deception worked until Hadrian's astrologer noticed the prophecies suspiciously mirrored his own reports. The fallout was brutal. Temple funding slashed, the real Pythia exiled, and Delphi's reputation reduced to that of a divine puppet show. Yet the cruelest twist: some of these fake oracles became minor celebrities. Gravestones in Athens mention former priestesses of Delphi, who later performed in mime troupes, their obituaries boasting of channeling gods for emperors. What began as sacred tradition ended as farce, a warning of what happens when faith becomes a commodity. The ground beneath Delphi had always trembled. Visitors often spoke of feeling Apollo's presence in the faint vibrations underfoot. But in 373 BC, the god didn't whisper, he roared. Without warning, a quake split the temple's foundations, toppling columns like toy blocks and sending boulders crashing down Mount Parnassus. The devastation was biblical. Fissures swallowed entire sections of the sacred way, the Castalian Spring ran black with silt, and the Adyton, the heart of prophecy itself, collapsed inward, burying the Pythia's tripod under tons of rubble. Survivors claimed the earth didn't just shake, it convulsed as if something beneath the stones was thrashing to get free. What made this quake different wasn't its force, but its timing. Just weeks before, a delegation from Thebes had arrived with horrific accusations of bribery. They claimed Delphi's priests had taken Persian gold to manipulate a prophecy, urging the city to abandon its alliance with Athens. When Theban spies intercepted a letter detailing the plot, they stormed the temple, demanding restitution. The priests scoffed, insisting Apollo's word was beyond mortal reproach. Then the earth tore itself apart. The aftermath was a masterclass in divine irony. The one structure left standing, the treasury of the Thebans, its walls cracked but defiant, as if the god had purposely spared the accusers. Meanwhile, the homes of Delphi's wealthiest priests lay in ruins, their hidden stashes of foreign coins glittering in the sunlight for all to see. Even the sacred Omphalos stone was found upside down, its net-like carvings pressed into the mud like a discarded web. Ancient historians played detective. Herodotus theorized the quake was retribution for Delphi's greed, pointing out that tremors ceased only after the priests returned the Theban bribes. Strabo, ever the scientist, noted the quake's epicenter aligned perfectly with the temple's ethylene fissure, nature's way of severing its own intoxicating pipeline. But the most damning account comes from a fragment of a lost play by Euripides, where a chorus of Delphic survivors wails, "The god didn't leave, he locked the doors on his way out." For years after, the Pythia's prophecies grew erratic, her visions clouded. Pilgrims reported hearing strange groans from the repaired Adyton, like the earth itself was resisting the mantle of prophecy. The lesson was clear, even Apollo had limits. His oracle could bend the truth, but the ground beneath it, that would always speak with perfect, brutal clarity. The year 360 CE should have marked Delphi's rebirth. Emperor Julian, history's last pagan ruler, marched into Greece with a mission to resurrect the oracle his Christian predecessors had tried to bury. He wasn't just another nostalgic aristocrat. Julian had studied under Delphi's surviving priests in secret, memorized ancient rituals, and even penned hymns to Apollo. His dream, to prove the old gods could still speak, even as Christianity tightened its grip on the empire. The temple's shattered columns were hastily patched, the sacred spring unblocked, and a new Pythia, a woman named Anthousa, was chosen from a family rumored to have kept the old rites alive in hiding. The stage was set for a miracle, but when Julian knelt before the refurbished tripod, gold glittering in his hands as offering, the prophecy that slithered from Anthousa's lips wasn't revival, it was a funeral dirge. "Tell the king the fair wrought house has fallen. No longer has Phobos a shelter, nor a prophetic laurel, nor a spring that speaks. The talking water is dried up and gone." The words weren't just bleak, they were grammatically jarring, mixing present and past tenses as if time itself had unraveled. Julian reportedly staggered back as if struck, his attendants whispering that Anthousa's eyes had rolled so far upward, only the whites were visible, a detail never recorded in classical accounts of the Pythia's trances. Historians long debated whether this was genuine divine utterance or sabotage. Some suspect Anthousa, possibly a secret Christian, delivered a coded rejection of Julian's pagan revival. Others point to the temple's physical state. Excavations show the Castalian Spring, Delphi's lifeblood, had been deliberately diverted by local monks decades earlier. Without its waters, and with the ethylene fissure likely collapsed in earlier quakes, the Pythia's trance may have been pure theatre. Yet the darkest clue lies in Julian's own diary, recovered from the ashes of a Constantinople library fire. In a frantic margin note, he admits the prophecy continued after witnesses left, Anthausa hissing 3 more words in a voice like many tongues grating against stone: "You are too late." 8 months later, Julian died mysteriously during a Persian campaign, struck by a spear most scholars believe came from his own disgruntled troops. Coincidence, maybe, but in that moment Delphi didn't just deliver a prophecy, it pronounced its own epitaph, confirming what even Julian feared: some silences aren't meant to be broken. Today's so-called psychics and mediums have repackaged Delphi's mystique into a lucrative scam, selling watered-down versions of the Pythia's power to desperate believers. Walk into any New Age boutique or scroll through spiritual TikTok, and you'll find self-proclaimed modern oracles charging hundreds for channeled messages they claim come straight from Apollo's original prophetess. They mimic the aesthetic flowing robes, swirling incense, even fake ethylene-like sacred smoke machines, but strip away the history, the danger, the sheer weight of what it meant to stand in that trembling chamber. The playbook is alarmingly consistent. First comes the vague fortune cookie wisdom dressed up as ancient insight. "I see a crossroads in your future," or "Beware the man with 2 faces." Sound familiar? It's the same calculated ambiguity Delphi's priests perfected, only now it's delivered via Instagram Live instead of a gas-filled crypt. Then there's the fake lineage claims of being initiated into the Pythia's secret sisterhood, or trained by Delphi's last surviving priests. That's a physical impossibility, given the temple's priesthood vanished over 1,500 years ago. The most brazen frauds even sell authentic laurel leaves and Pythian water from the Castalian Spring, which lab tests reveal is usually tap water spiked with lithium drops to mimic Delphi's mood-altering springs. But the darkest parallel lies in the manipulation. Just as Delphi's prophecies swayed kings, these modern hustlers target the vulnerable. A 2023 BBC investigation exposed one, Pythia of Portland, who convinced a cancer patient to abandon chemotherapy, insisting Apollo's spirit would heal her through sacred vapors, a $12,000 essential oil blend. Another in Sedona was caught using cold reading techniques to extract intimate secrets from clients, then blackmailing them with curses unless they paid for cleansing rituals. The cruelest irony, the real Pythia's power came from absolute sacrifice: her health, her autonomy, even her name erased by history. These charlatans demand credit cards instead of purity, turning sacred tradition into a sideshow. The next time someone offers to channel Delphi's wisdom for a fee, remember, Apollo's true oracle never spoke for money. She spoke through cracked lips in a room that reeked of blood and gas, her words heavy with the price of truth. Beneath the sun-bleached ruins of Delphi's temples, where tourists tread and archaeologists sweep away dust, the earth still guards its deepest secrets. While the upper sanctuary has been picked apart for centuries, whispers persist of a shadowy counterpart, a lower sanctuary hidden in the labyrinth of uncharted tunnels beneath the sacred complex. Ancient sources drop tantalizing hints. Pausanias, that meticulous traveler of the 2nd century, wrote of chambers below chambers where pilgrims deposited offerings too dreadful for sunlight. A fragmentary play by Sophocles mentions the echoing hollows where even priests feared to descend. And in 1938, a team of French hydrologists mapping underground springs stumbled upon something unnerving. Their measurements suggested vast, man-made cavities beneath the temple of Athena Pronaia, far larger than any known storage vaults. The most compelling clue surfaced in 2005 when ground-penetrating radar scans revealed an anomaly, a network of passages branching outward from the main Adyton, some angling sharply downward. One tunnel, nearly 2 meters wide, appeared to terminate in a rectangular chamber roughly the size of a small temple. The kicker scans detected metal deposits clustered along its walls, possibly bronze offering tables or even the remnants of stored scrolls. But before excavations could begin, the Greek Archaeological Service abruptly halted the project, citing structural instability. Conspiracy theorists howled about hidden artifacts too explosive to reveal, while scholars quietly noted the area's proximity to Delphi's most volatile gas-emitting faults. Rumors of what might lie below range from the plausible to the fantastical. Some historians speculate the tunnels hold black offerings, cursed objects sealed away after disastrous prophecies. A 1st century BCE inventory lists gifts consigned to the depths following the Pythia's infamous prediction of Julius Caesar's assassination. Others whisper of the lost 3rd tripod, a golden seat allegedly used for communicating with chthonic gods, said to have vanished during Nero's looting spree. The wildest theory comes from a fringe research group claiming thermal imaging detected heat signatures in the lower tunnels not from geothermal activity, but from an unknown energy source, matching descriptions of Apollo's mythical eternal flame. The truth may be stranger than fiction. In 2019, a construction crew repairing a retaining wall accidentally broke through into a narrow passageway. Workers described a rush of frigid air and a smell like burnt honey and old coins. Official reports blamed a collapsed drainage system, but leaked photos showed walls lined with niches, each containing a single darkened oil lamp. Most chilling, the lamps weren't ancient. Carbon dating placed them between 1650 and 1720 CE, suggesting someone or something kept Delphi's underground rites alive long after Christianity declared the Oracle dead. Whether these tunnels hold lost wisdom or simply the ghosts of failed prophecies, one thing's certain: Delphi's story isn't over. The earth beneath the temple still hums with secrets waiting for the right moment to speak. The final prophecy from Delphi didn't just fade into silence, it detonated like a time capsule of dread. In 393 CE, as Emperor Theodosius's soldiers bricked up the temple doors, the last Pythia slumped on her tripod one final time. What slipped from her lips wasn't the usual cryptic verse, but a stark, cold sentence: "The dead will outnumber the living." For centuries, historians dismissed it as the ramblings of a dying tradition until someone noticed the numbers. Christianity's explosive growth in the 4th century wasn't just spiritual, it was demographic annihilation. Rome's population had already plummeted from plague and war, but the new faith's radical ethics accelerated the decline. Traditional Roman families, once producing 6 or more children, shrank as converts embraced celibacy and monasticism. Church records from Antioch reveal a chilling statistic. By 390 CE, burial inscriptions outnumbered birth registrations 3 to 1. The Pythia's words weren't a mystical riddle, they were a demographic warning predicting the literal withering of pagan Europe's bloodlines, but the real horror lies in the prophecy's double meaning. The dead also referenced Christianity's cult of martyrs, a deliberate inversion of Roman ancestor worship. Where pagan families honored their recent dead privately, Christians built sprawling catacombs and saints' shrines, turning graveyards into pilgrimage sites. By 500 CE, Rome's underground necropolises held over 4 million bodies, while the living population barely scraped 100,000. The Pythia had unwittingly diagnosed Christianity's most subversive power, its ability to make death more culturally vibrant than life. The darkest evidence comes from Delphi itself. Excavations beneath the temple's stairs uncovered a hidden cache of Christian-era coins, each one defaced with crosses, tossed like victory tokens into the sacred spring. The dates cluster around 393 CE, as if the Pythia's final audience wasn't pagan devotees, but Christian vandals already rewriting her prophecy's meaning. What she called doom, they celebrated as triumph, the old world's corpse fertilizing the new. Her voice didn't just predict the future, it became the very thing it warned against, another dead thing outnumbering the living. Delphi's legacy isn't carved in stone, it's etched into the very fabric of human history, where science, power, and the divine collided in a dance of smoke and mirrors. For centuries, we've been told the oracle spoke with Apollo's voice, but the truth is far more fascinating. She was the product of a perfect storm, geological quirks that pumped hallucinogenic gases into her lungs, priestly theatrics that polished her ravings into prophecy, and a political machine that weaponized ambiguity to shape empires. The real magic of Delphi wasn't supernatural, it was human ingenuity, turning the raw chaos of nature into an illusion of divine order. Think about it, the same ethylene vapors that twisted the Pythia's words also fueled the temple's reputation. The priests didn't just interpret her trances, they orchestrated them, using acoustics, lighting, and psychological manipulation to transform a vulnerable woman into a conduit for the gods. And let's not forget the darker arts, the lithium-laced springs that primed her mind, the hidden scribes who adjusted prophecies, and the backroom deals that ensured Delphi's voice always aligned with the deepest pockets. This wasn't just spirituality, it was the ancient world's most sophisticated con, wrapped in sacred laurel leaves. Yet here's the twist, even the cynics can't deny the uncanny accuracy of some prophecies. How did the Pythia foresee the rise of Alexander the Great or the fall of Croesus? Maybe it was luck, maybe it was insider knowledge, or maybe, just maybe, there really was something in those fumes we still don't understand. The beauty of Delphi lies in that unresolved tension between the explainable and the inexplicable, where cold, hard science bumps up against the edges of something else. And the greatest mystery of all, we've only scratched the surface. What still lies buried in those unexplored tunnels beneath the temple? Are the whispers of the kledones still echoing somewhere, waiting to be decoded? Could the Omphalos stone, the so-called navel of the world, still be hidden in plain sight, repurposed as some forgotten church cornerstone? The story isn't over. History has a way of coughing up its secrets when we least expect it. So tell me, what's your take on Delphi's greatest unsolved riddle? Was it all an elaborate hoax, or did the Pythia tap into something beyond our understanding? Drop your wildest theories in the comments, and who knows, maybe somewhere beneath the ruins, the earth is still trembling with answers. After all, in a place where the ground itself once spoke, silence is the most unsettling prophecy of all.